Meditation arises within a context of divine order that we have lost because in the postmodern West, everything is split up into the smallest marketable elements. And so there has been a commercialization of yoga. And some sell asanas, and some sell meditation, and some sell jnana, and some sell various other activities like kirtan and other forms of bhakti. And so the whole context of what yoga really is has been lost. Even in India, it's being lost. But it's an archetype, and it's present in every culture that is healthy. Even though as time goes on, the original formats of the various processes become ritualized and lose their true significance. So, for example, we can see in the Catholic tradition there are 3 essential sacraments, processes, you could call them: baptism, the Eucharist, and confession. These are all present as elements of yoga as well. The baptism is sannyas. And the word baptism comes from bap, which means father. It's the taking of a new spiritual father. Yeshua took his baptism with the Guru, John the Baptist, as an adult. And the baptism is a death and a rebirth. It's only within the context of death and rebirth that meditation becomes functional. The reason why most people cannot meditate is that they have not died to their biological family identity. Christ is called the Logos. It's not the bio-logos, however. It's the pneumato-logos, the logos of the Holy Spirit. And it is only by belonging to the family of the Holy Spirit that we are then able to meditate and receive the radiance of that Spirit. Because the biologic of the identification with the body causes us to want to imitate not God, not realize ourselves in the likeness of the Father, but to imitate the parents, to take on their identity, their tics, their attitudes, their symptoms of suffering, and make those our own. And it is only after we have died to the biological family identification that we can even actually have a loving relationship with our biological family members. Because otherwise they won't see you as you really are. They will only keep their projections on you, which have been the cause of the dysfunctionality of the ego in the first place. And there is no leverage. And there must not be any need for the validation of the biological family, but only of the spiritual family. That the Bap, the Father, who introduces you into the new logos of the spiritual Sangha, can enable you then to be reborn with a new identity. And usually a new name. But there are people who come and take the name, but do not change the inner identification. And so the logic of how the mind processes reality does not change. And there is always a nostalgia for the biological family and a loyalty to that family that prevents a loyalty to God. This happens even in profane marriages, where in the past it used to be the woman, but more often it's the man who, and very often nowadays, neither party truly leaves the biological family and marries the other. which creates the mother-in-law problem, because the man is more loyal to his mother than to his wife. And so the family system of the new family is contaminated by the fact that the old lines of force and chains of command have not been broken, so that a new relationship and a new identity with a new life that can then bring new life into the world, uncontaminated by the family curses of the past, can be brought into manifestation. But in the spiritual family, the death and rebirth is far more important. It is that cleanses the mind. Because the mind, when the family system has been dysfunctional, indeed becomes an iron bubble, full of the defilements and the traumas and the scapegoating and the failure of love and the failure of recognition and the exploitation and hostile dependency and the envy that all the families these days consist of. And so long as one has not been able to break through that bubble by creating a new identity free of all of that baggage, then meditation cannot yet truly begin, because meditation means finding your center. And it is that very identification with the biologic that creates a false center, in which the true silence of the mind of God cannot be located, because the mind is always gravitating toward achieving something so that one will be validated in the eyes of the family system. The ego is a being for others. It is not a being in itself or for itself. And therefore it cannot be a being for God. So it is only when that death of the initial ego system in its rehearsal family has been cut that a new sense of relationship, of being for others who are themselves being for God, can create an intermediary identity that then enables the full internalization of the realization that in itself you are that supreme self whose validation you have always been seeking. And it is in this context then that the sacrament of the Eucharist, which is the taking on, the consuming of the body and the blood of the crucified Christ, which means your own traumas, your own blood, your own pain, your own agonies, are transubstantiated into the realization of God consciousness. And pain becomes wisdom and the power of love. The ability to have real compassion and empathy begins with that morphing of our pain into the realization of that state that is beyond karma, from which the Holy Spirit can radiate through you as a channel that power of healing that is the proof of the fruition of the self in its fulfillment of realization of an untouched, undefiled purity of self, which is the point through which the living waters of divine love flow into this world. And you are able to baptize others with those living waters of love. But to maintain the integrity and the purity of these two processes, there is also required confession. Because the sanskaras, the tendencies of the past, do not tend to disappear so easily with a simple event of baptism. And thus there must be an ongoing processing of those sanskaras, those tendencies, those agonies, those memories, those traumas, those false identifications, in a process that here we call atmanology, in which the realization of the true meaning and significance of these karmic ordeals that one has gone through can lead to their teleological realization as the very lineaments of your process toward God realization, and not keep you stuck in the woundedness of the past, but enable the healing of those wounds so that you will have the ability to heal the wounds of others through the knowledge that comes from the knitting together of your own scar tissue and your own coming together of the torn soul into a unity and integrity with Spirit, once again, in which no ego shell is required as an exoskeleton behind which the truth of your being must hide out of fear. We must live fearlessly. And when there is no fear, there is no desire, because there is no lack. And it is in this realization of the fullness of the presence of God that is your true identity, that the flow of life becomes one of spontaneous grace. And it is in this grace, that disgrace of the failure to live in the likeness of God, with the goodness and the beauty and the power of God, as we are meant to do, can be overcome. And that dignity of our divine being can once more be restored, as through our surrender and binding with God, we become avatars, we become Christed, we become the very manifestations that we had worshipped. And through that, we are able to transfigure all of those with whom we are in relationship, through the simple realization of the divinity of every being and the equality of that divinity, in which there is no hierarchy, there are no differences. There is one radiance that is the source of us all. And it is in the unity of that radiance of divine light and love that a new culture, with the attributes of justice and fairness and mercy and integrity, and the power of living with absolute generosity and creative intelligence, because the nature of God is the intellect that produces intelligence. The Father is the intellect, the Son is the intelligence. The intellect is that absolute potentiality of mind, but that is beyond mind, beyond the kinetic connection and connectivity of all things that the intelligence is able to produce and thus manifest grids and networks and processes and organizations and patterns of beauty and power and truth in this world, which is our function, that can only be fulfilled when the mind has been purified and able to function at its maximum level of the divine intelligence that we are meant to channel, not simply the human level of intelligence, which is too small and too petty to meet the challenges that we now face here at the end of Kali Yuga, when only a divine renaissance will enable the survival of a remnant of mankind after the tribulation and the apocalyptic events that are about to unfold upon us have taken place. And the question of our own destiny as children of God, as manifestations of that one radiance, is now hanging in the balance, and all souls are on trial. It is only through the fulfillment of these processes, of these sacraments, of these divine obligations, that our own transformational imperative can be fulfilled, and the divine self can emerge behind the mask of the human false self and offer to mankind the hope, the power, the beauty of the fulfillment of the destiny promised by every religious tradition. We are those who were prophesied to come, but each of us must take up the cross and the rod and the staff and the total dedication to the transformation through the crucifixion of the ego and the ascension to the supreme light, to live as those avataric manifestations who alone can, in the creation of an energy field of a true community in which the Holy Spirit can be downloaded fully into our midst, survive the travails that we are about to face, and produce the kingdom of heaven that is meant to follow and can only come if we have truly arrived as who we are. May your meditations be filled with light and love and the power of surrender to the one Supreme Being who alone can save us from the agony of our own lostness, blindness, and will to ignorance, and bring us the blessing of truth and goodness.